Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Srini here, and this is my third video in the series, guys, for the prerequisites for a Selenium automation framework. So if you're new to this channel, I would strongly recommend go ahead and subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notifications. So as you can see from this playlist, there are a lot of free videos on Selenium automation framework. Even there are separate playlists on Java and Selenium and Java interview questions as well. So you'll be benefited very much, and you will be able to clear the Selenium interview easily. So let's get started with today's topic. So today's topic is on object repository. So what is an object repository and what are the different things which we are going to cover? Let's look at that. So these are going to be key takeaways from this particular video. What is an object repository? So does Selenium have an object repository default one like how QTP automation tool has? And what are the different ways how we can have an object repository available in Selenium? Right? So these are the three different key takeaways which you can surely take away from this particular video, and you will be able to understand it thoroughly. So let's get started. What is an object repository, right? So any particular automation tool has this particular concept or terminology used called object repository. What this means is that when you want to do any automation of any application, you need to first interact with the application, right? So how would you be able to interact with any application? You can interact with its components, or what we call as web element. In terms of Selenium, we are nothing but calling any component of an application like this image, this particular text label, this particular hyperlink. All of these are web elements in a web application, right? So what happens now? Each of these elements basically have to be inspected. Like they, as I've told you all in my previous sessions, they can be inspected and they can be found with an ID or a class or a name or a XPath, right? So this is how we are going to identify the object, and that is how, when you are having a sequence of steps in your automation script, it will be able to interact with these elements, right? So we need to have one central location where all of these web elements get stored so that it is easier for us to access. That is one thing. Second thing is that rather than having these element locators as a part of our automation script hard-coded, we would rather want it to have as a separate object storage area, which will just have objects, right? It will not have any kind of a infusion part with respect to the test case steps, or maybe with the test data, what test data we want to give for a test case. So we always would want our objects to be kept separate from our test data and also from our test steps, because that will make it more separated and more cleaner rather than having everything hard-coded into our automation script. That is the first basic principle or a thumb rule which we have to follow when we are designing an automation framework. We need to have a proper object repository, right? Now, what are the different ways we can have an object repository created? And does Selenium have any default object repository, right? So let's come to that question. Selenium does not have any default object repository, unlike QTP, right? Because QTP has a default object repository. So when you start recording with QTP tool, it will automatically keep recording those elements and it will store into its object repository. But Selenium does not have that feature. But that's not a big issue, because we can create our own object repository. So there are different ways to create object repository, and we are going to look at that in this particular video. That's the third topic. What are the different ways we can create an object repository in a Selenium framework, right? So let me mention it here, a quick thing, right? So there are two ways actually. There are two ways about it. The first one is using properties file, right? So we have already looked at the properties file in our previous sessions. So you can look at my first session. I have a separate video on how to create a properties file and read the data from that. And the next one is read the locators from .xml file. So this is the second part. So first one is you can read it from a properties file, read the locators from a properties file. And the other method is to read the locators from a .xml file. Now, many of the aspirants or the candidates who are appearing for interview, they often know about the .properties file, and they are able to answer it when the interviewer asks them that particular question, how they maintain the object repository, right? But often sometimes they do not know what are the other ways. So I'll tell you, there is another way also. Third way is through page object model. And the fourth way is nothing but It's nothing but a default inbuilt page object model which Selenium has, that is called Page Factory. So these are actually the 4 different ways we can have an object repository in a Selenium framework. So if any interviewer asks you, you can directly tell them these are the 4 different ways. There maybe just one more way, maybe you can store the locators in a backend table in a database. Okay, let's have all the ways covered, right? So that you can answer if this question is asked to you. The next one is storing it in a database table. You can create a database table which will just have the locators, and you can have as different columns store different properties. Maybe one column will be for the locator value. One column will tell is it identifying by the ID or the class or the name or XPath, etc. And the next one, which is not a recommended approach as per my suggestion, would be Excel. It's not a good practice to store the locators as a separate Excel sheet or etc. Rather than that, you can use the properties file or you can use the page object model. So that is a more better approach, I feel. But still, if you would want to go with that approach, you can go with that. You just have to use Apache POI. So read locators from Excel using Apache POI. So basically, we will be having one particular sheet storing all the locators of that particular application, and you can just mention what particular locator you want to read, and it will be able to read the data from that Excel sheet using Apache POI. So these are the different ways which I have come across, and which even you can use to read the data from a object repository. You can see these are different ways of storing as an object repository for the element locator, right? So still, if you have any other way, you can leave the comment in my video and let me know, and I can even update it in the slide deck and share with you all, right? These are the 6 different common ways you can have the object repository created in a Selenium framework. So we have already seen dot properties files. I'm not going to repeat it again. You can look at my previous video. We are going to look at page object model and page factory later in our sessions, and even database interactions also will be covered as a part of prerequisites in Selenium framework. And Excel also we are going to cover as a part of the prerequisites playlist, right? So let's look at the second option in this particular session, that is how to read the locators from a .xml file. So for that particular thing, right, we are going to use one particular class called SAX reader. But for that to be used, you need to first have couple of jar files as a part of your project, right? So that I have already added as a part of my lib folder. So let me show you what are those jars, and you have to have them as a part of your project. Yeah. So the first one is Jackson, right? So I'm just going to show it to you all. One is a Jackson jar, right? You can see Jackson hyphen. This is the first jar which we need to use for reading the data from an XML file. And the next one which we need to use is a DOM4j-1.6. So this will allow us to read the data from XML because it uses a DOM structure. So will be able to read the data from XML. So these are the 2 jars which you have to download. Now you can just go to this particular Maven repository, mvnrepository.com, and you just have to search here the respective jar, like how I searched here DOM4j. You can similarly search for Jackson, and I'll just show you how it appears. Just search for this jar, right? And you can see that it shows you this first option, Jackson, right? So just go to this part and you just have to download 1.1.1. Just click on this one. You can click on this link actually, and you'll be able to download the jar from this particular path, right? So once you have downloaded that, just add it to your build path, and it will be a part of your reference libraries here, right? So I'm going to comment out these 2. Okay. So now let's come into like how we can basically do the config properties part as a part of the XML. So these 2 locators which are there will now be actually read from an XML file. So what we can do is we can create another file and just create a new file and just call it like properties.xml. Give the .xml extension. So you'll see that design source is empty because you've not started any coding yet. Now we have to use XML coding here. So if you are new to XML, just get the basics, or it's very easy to understand. So let's just say that this entire all elements are going to be a part of this Selenium Easy application. So what I'll do is I'll say Selenium Easy app, right? I've got this kind of HTML tags here. Now as a part of these important or this application, there are all different elements, right? So let's say input forms, I'm just giving my own user defined name of the tag. It will automatically give you the ending part. And similarly, I need to click on radio buttons demo. So I'm going to have another radio buttons demo as another tag, right? Now what we have to store here is going to be the XPath. So for the input forms, we already have the XPath as a part of our config properties file. We just have to give that value here. Like this. Similarly, copy the radio buttons demo and give that as a part of this tag. That's all we need to do with respect to XML file. So whatever locators we had seen in config properties, that was one way of representation as key value pair. Here we are doing it in the form of XML, where the tag name will actually represent what element we want to access. So if you go to this design section, it will show you a proper hierarchical representation now, that this is going to be your root element and these are going to be your children elements, input forms and radio button demo. So we can directly access these from this path. So I'll show you how it is to be done. So wherever we are using this particular path, right? So for now, we are basically reading the data from config properties file. So rather than doing that, let's do one thing. Let's create another utility method to read the data from an XML file. So what we would do is we'll create another method, read from XML. Right, reading from XML is what we are going to do here. Now, first thing what we have to do is that we have to create the object of SAX reader. Right, you have to create the object of SAX reader. So we're going to create an object here equal to new SAX reader. So we'll have to import it. So for that we require the jar. We have imported now, right? Now next thing what we have to do is that we have to read the data, right? We have to read the data, but from which particular file we need to read the data? We need to read the data from properties.xml file. Again, I'm using the word file. As I had mentioned to you all, in case of properties, we have to use file. So we have to first get that particular configuration set. So we have to create a file object. So similar to that, we will create a file object and I can use the same file object. I just have to give it a different value. So I'll use the same one, but I'm going to change the path now. So instead of saying till config properties, I'm going to say properties.xml. Right. So this SAX reader will be able to read the data from an XML file. We have stored it into this file, right? So we are going to say reader.read. So it's having an option here for file, and we have already created a file object here. So let's pass that parameter here. Right? And let's look at what it is giving. It's giving us an unhandled exception type, maybe document exception. What if it is not able to read or refer the document? Then you can just surround with exception handling. So I've surrounded with the exception handling try catch, and let's just print the exception. Read from XML method, right? And just get the exception message. That's it. Right. So once we have read the data, what else do we need to do? Do we need to do anything else here? Right. So what we can do is that we can also get the exact element what we want to retrieve. So for that, as we had done in case of a properties file, we can create a separate method. Retrieve XML value. So let's have a separate method. And for this particular one, we would have to basically pass it a particular value. What particular exact element we want to retrieve. So how we've done in properties file, we were just trying to give the key and it was giving us the property prop.get property. Similar to that, we are going to create one more utility method and it will be able to retrieve the data from the XML and give us the particular value, right? So first thing is that when you try to read the data from this SAX reader, it is giving you the return type as a document. So let's create the object first. So we'll have an object here called as document. Okay, and we'll have to import the org.dom4j, right? And now we are going to initialize whatever it is returning to us, this reader.read file. So doc equal to reader.read file, and now we are going to use this object doc to get the data of a particular XML. So let's say doc dot. Now it has got a particular method which will allow us to retrieve the data from a XML. So we'll just try to select that particular attribute from that particular XML. So we are going to have a method here called select single node. So here we have to pass the exact way how we are going to retrieve to that element, right? So first we have to start with the root node. So the root node, if you look at the properties file, is starting with Selenium Easy App. So go to that and just write Selenium Easy App, right? And after you navigate to this, you have to use just one / and you are going to reach to, let's say input forms is one of the element. That's it. This is how we are selecting a single node from your root element, that is the Selenium Easy App. But that's not all. What we have to retrieve actually is the property, right? We have to retrieve this XPath. So we have to use get text, because we are going to retrieve the value. We have to retrieve using the get text. So this will return the XPath value of that particular element. Basically, it's going to get the value of that element. So it has to return a string value. So how it's going to do that? It's just going to do using this return, right? Return doc.select single node, whatever element dot get text. But we cannot hard code like this, right? Because it depends upon which particular element we want to retrieve. So that is why we can have the element name mentioned like this, right? To retrieve the element, we can do like that. And what we can also do is we can create one more file called as constants file. So for that, let me create an interface that will be good. So I'll just create constants, because interface will have any variables by default will be fine and it will be constant. So I'm going to have the input forms and radio buttons demo. So it's going to say input forms, okay, and radio buttons demo. Okay. So what I'm going to do is whatever is there in the properties.xml file, these values exactly have to be there in my constants. So what is the name here? Input forms is as it is, then radio buttons demo, right? It's exactly same. So what I'll do here is that input form element equal to, it's going to be a string value, right? And similarly radio button element, it's going to have a string value. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to copy this exact name, radio buttons demo. So we are going to have that exactly here. Fine. So this is how we are going to store the actual name of what is there in properties file. We can just create a constants interface and we can just refer it. So rather than hard coding, what we could do is that whenever a test case would need a particular element in that particular properties XML file, it can just directly get it through this particular file, right? Okay. So what we will do now is that we will break this string. So we are going to break this string like this, and we are going to append the element, the string element. That's it. So what would happen? It will automatically concatenate the string whatever we have after this, and that's it. Our path is formed. Now what we need to do is we need to go to test home page, and we need to repeat this action. So what we will do is we will not disturb this method. We will use this for properties file. So we'll just say using properties file, and we'll keep it untouched. Let's create another test method, and let's say here using XML file. Okay, and this is using prop. Yeah, prop. Fine. Now, how do we access that particular method? Again, we can use click element, not to worry at all. We just have to somehow get the X path. That's our motto. We have to pass the element to this click element. We can keep it like that, but we have to use some property here. Instead of read property, we have to refer to another way how we can get the value. So we are going to get the X path obtained in this particular parameter. So the method is going to be retrieve XML value, right? We are going to retrieve the XML value. So we're going to put that here. Retrieve XML value, retrieve XML value, but we have to pass a parameter. So we will be passing a parameter here, right? We are just making it like a method. Now, what is the parameter going to be? So parameter would be coming from your constants interface, right? So it's going to be from your constants interface. So input form element. So what we will do is that we will make our base class implement constants interface. So automatically, so we are using this inheritance interface concept also as a part of a framework now. So automatically all the classes also would be using this constants. So we are going to import so looks like this constants is a part of keyword, some keyword. So rather than having as name constants, we can just refactor it and change it to some other thing. Okay. Yeah. So let's import constants file, and that's it. Errors are gone. Let's come back to this. So we have to pass a parameter now, right? We have to add the argument to match this. So that is going to come from your already it's there, right? Because already constants file interface is implemented by base class, and all of the classes are extending base class. So they would be having input form element automatically. So I just have to pass input form element. That's it. So it has got the value of that, and it is able to retrieve the XML value, and it will be able to click on it. And next thing what we have to do is pass the radio button element. So I'm going to pass that parameter here, right? Now there is another step which is pending. That is that we have to first load the method. We have to first load the method to read the contents from an XML file, like how we were doing for a property file. Similar to that, for reading the data from XML, we have to make this method also as a part of our call, the before method call, right? As we were doing for initial config, let's make a call for read from XML as well. So that is way where we can, how we can just read the contents from an XML file. So let's run this particular program. And if you want to just skip the other project, the other test from running, there is an attribute called enabled. Just make it as false. So it will not be run. It will be skipped from running. So only this test case will run now. So let's recheck once more. So before method is having the way to load the XML, and in actual @test, we are retrieving the XML value for the individual element. So let's go ahead and run this program. So started running. So it will be just running the one which we have made as run. The other one is made enabled false. It will not run. So that's it. Our test case has successfully completed, and there was no error at all. The reason for that is because we have made the XML loaded first in our base class before method. This is important step, read from XML. If you don't do that, you're going to get null pointer exception, because you will not be able to use the value of property. See, test radio button using XML, and we have used the XML file, and that is how we have read the contents of this entire XML file and read the locators. So I hope this session was useful to you all. So that's all as a part of this session. So this was the second way of reading the data from a kind of an object repository. So we have seen config properties as one object repository, right? We have seen the XML as the another type. We would be seeing the page object model, page factory, and the other concepts in our subsequent sessions. So stay tuned for that and do like and share this video with your friends. Thank you so much.